Hello everyone, and welcome to the video presentation of our paper, Who's Accessing My Data? Application Level Access Control for Bluetooth Low Energy. This is a joint effort between Pallavi Sivakumaran and myself, Jorge Blasco. Unfortunately, Pallavi couldn't take part in the conference, so I will be presenting the paper. This work is on the domain of Bluetooth Low Energy, and in particularly, it focuses on a security issue we identified as part of previous research we did in the domain. The security issue relies on unauthorized data access on Bluetooth Low Energy devices, and in particular at the application layer. So before we talk about the solution we propose about the problem, which is the main focus of the paper, let's first talk about the problem that we are trying to solve. But even before talking about the problem, let's talk a little bit about Bluetooth Low Energy so everyone can understand what the problem and the solution are about. Bluetooth Low Energy, or BLE as we will say during the presentation, is a short-range wireless communication protocol that's used in billions of devices today. It has a large number of use cases, as you can see in the slide, going for fitness trackers, which is probably the most well-known, to child safety watches, home and accessories, asset tracking, smart locks, and even insulin pumps. As the huge large number of use cases, it also has a huge number of devices being deployed, and because of some of these use cases have a lot of security and safety concerns, the security of BLE is also very important. A common usage scenario of BLE is to use a BLE device, like a fitness tracker or a glucose monitor, with an app on a mobile phone or a computer. Normally, these devices come with one app that we normally call the official app, which we expect to be able to access the data from the device. The user may also want to use another app to access the device, but in all cases, we believe that the user should know which applications are able to access the data on their BLE device and when. Data on BLE devices is stored in form of discrete values that are called attributes. An attribute can have different permissions applied to it that restrict access to it. In this example, and in many cases, authentication permissions are a very, very common permission case. Authentication permissions are achieved via pairing, which basically means that in order to read, in this particular case, the glucose measurement, we first need to pair the device with our mobile phone, so the device allows access to the mobile app to the data. If the device is not paired, the device will reject access to the particular data point, in this case, the glucose measurement. In our previous research, we found that on platforms like Android or iOS, which host multiple applications or apps, when one application, let's say the official app, triggers the pairing and accessing pairing protected data, after that point, any other app on the device will also be able to access that data. It means that once an application has been granted access, all the applications on that same device can access data on that particular device. And the worst thing about this is that there is no indication of this access to the user, so applications can do this in the background. This happens because pairing occurs between lower layers of the BLE stack, without, in these cases, extending to the application layer. So, how can we get around this issue? What solutions can we offer to this? Well, right now, the only way to get around this is by using what we call application layer protection or application layer security. And this is end product developers developing their own cryptography and security mechanisms to produce and to obtain end-to-end protection between the BLE device and the application. The problem is that we actually identified in our previous work that many developers don't implement such protections, and even when they do, sometimes they don't do it correctly. Another option would be for vendors like Android, iOS, Windows, and other operating system developers to implement a solution for this. However, most platforms do not implement sufficient protection mechanisms as of today. In fact, in the case, for example, of Android, even when you have application permissions, these are not enough. because whenever an application requests the permission to access a Bluetooth device, it only requests the permission to access Bluetooth in general. It doesn't request permission to access Bluetooth for a particular device. So today, per application permissions are still insufficient to solve this particular issue. So, any solution for this unauthorized data access vulnerability will of course have a set of security requirements. However, there are also other considerations that we need to take into account as well, because we want the solution to be practical. What we do in the next few slides is to describe these requirements and considerations that allow us to reach a final solution. Our threat model assumes an honest and uncompromised platform and peripherals, but it assumes that applications may be untrusted. We believe these are reasonable assumptions, as most of the applications are installed on unmodified systems. Of course, if someone roots or modifies their own operating system, these assumptions wouldn't hold. Based on these assumptions, we define the following security requirements. First, an application should not be able to access the data from a BLE peer device without the user knowledge and explicit authorization. This is, whenever an application wants to access data, it would need to request permission from the user. The next requirement is that user authorization should be granted to an application for every peer device individually. That is, if an application is granted permission to access one peer device, it shouldn't be possible for that application to access any other BLE peer device. The third requirement is that the user must be able to revoke access that has previously been granted to an application for a BLE peer device. This would be similar as it happens today in Android and iOS, where you can basically go to the settings of the phone and change the permissions that you grant to a particular app. Something similar should be possible for BLE devices as well. Apart from these security requirements, we also define 3 system requirements. The first is that all devices that implement the solution should incorporate protection by default. That is, any specification compliant BLE system should automatically protect against and be protected from unauthorized data access at the application layer. The next requirement is that devices that incorporate the solution should function with existing devices. Today, there are billions of BLE-enabled devices, and we don't want a solution that obsoletes such a high number of devices that are used every day. Thirdly, resource-constrained devices shouldn't have too much additional processing to do. BLE is supposed to enable low-power devices to communicate, but if an access control mechanism requires a lot of processing, that can cause the battery to drain faster, which could make the whole system unusable. A solution that satisfies the requirements that we described in the previous slides will be secure and usable, but the question that arises now is who should be the one implementing this solution, or who should be in charge of making this happen. In the BLE ecosystem, there are several stakeholders. So what we did in the paper is also to analyze the different stakeholders to see who has or who should, in our opinion, try to implement such changes. In our case, we consider the Bluetooth Special Interest Group, which is the entity that defines and maintains the BLE specification, the chipset vendors who manufacture BNE-enabled chipsets, platform vendors like Android, iOS, etc., who develop operating systems who run apps that communicate with BLE peripherals, and product developers who design and develop BLE-enabled peripherals and apps, and finally users, who are the ones that use the devices and applications. In our case, we don't expect users to do anything apart from actually granting permissions or revoking them, so we focus our analysis on the first 4 stakeholders. When doing this consideration, one thing we need to consider is the number of entities we are asking changes from. The fewer the entities, the easier it is to communicate a solution. In that way, we believe that the special interest group as a single point of contact is probably the best one, because it's a single entity. The second one would be platform vendors, who are also few in number. In addition to this, not all stakeholders respond satisfactorily when they are made aware of a vulnerability. The special interest group as well as chipset and platform vendors, tend to be better at responding than end device developers. This actually was corroborated with our previous research on BLE security. Also, there is some degree of responsibility relaying, where each stakeholder will assume that the problem is actually taken care or should be taken care of by another stakeholder. This is something that we need to take into consideration when defining our solution. Finally, there needs to actually be a mechanism for updating existing systems with the new solution. Again, the BLE specification, as well as multi-application platforms, tend to have robust update mechanisms. In our previous research, we've seen that a significant proportion of real-world peripheral devices don't even implement over-the-air firmware update mechanisms. So, in this particular case, peripherals won't be easy to update. However, the special interest group and platforms are easier to update, in our opinion. So, based on all these considerations, we came up with the following solution design. Our proposed solution involves changes to the BLE specification. This is, we believe that the SIG are the ones who should promote the change in this particular case. This is the only way to ensure that the solution gets implemented on all systems. The good news about this is that it doesn't need changes in all systems. It mainly involves modifications to multi-application platform. The solution in our case requires 3 new components to be added to the BLE specification. The first one is what we call the Attribute Access Database. This stores per application, per device access permissions as are granted by the user. The second one is a new layer within the BLE stack between the GATT and application layers to arbitrate GATT requests. And the third element is a property for a BLE device. So we are actually changing just one variable or introducing one variable for each BLE device in the BLE stack. And this indicates whether it hosts one or multiple applications. The behavior of the device will change depending on this device mode. A device mode that hosts one application will act as BLE devices have been acting until today. However, we expect a device hosting multiple applications to behave differently according to our solution. There are also requirements for how user authorization should be requested and for access revocation, of course. So we had a requirement for explicit user authorization, as we've mentioned earlier, and also a requirement for access revocation, as we mentioned earlier, that is needed. This slide that shows a huge diagram shows the proposed workflow when a multi-application device receives a GATT request to connect a BLE device. Essentially, and this is probably the most important part, the request is sent to this new element, the Attribute Access Manager, along with an identifier for the requesting app, as well as the BLE device in question. The Attribute Access Manager queries the database, and if the app device pair doesn't exist within the database, the user will be notified about this authorization request. Depending on the user response, a new entry will be added into the table, or the connection will be rejected. And the most important thing is that through this explicit message, the user is aware of any unauthorized or possible unauthorized access, and access attempts that are not really authorized can be defeated. To demonstrate the feasibility of our solution, we design and develop a proof of concept. We developed this under the Android x86 platform. It includes a series of changes both in Java and C++ files, and the changes are available online if anyone wants to check them on a GitHub repository. And we tested our proof of concept in Android x86 with a real-world device. In this case, it's called a VeriFit. It's a device that can be bought on Amazon. It's a very cheap fitness tracker. And we found that, as mentioned earlier, that there was explicit user awareness about data access. Also, the VeriFit doesn't even require pairing. So this actually proves that this could defeat unauthorized access even when the device itself doesn't require pairing. An important matter that we need to also mention is that we didn't make a user testing and we didn't check if users were happy with the way information was presented, but the purpose of a proof of concept was to prove that it is possible to defeat these unauthorized data accesses. So through this, we demonstrate that our solution satisfies all the requirements laid out, the 3 security requirements and the 3 system requirements, but it also comes with a number of additional benefits. So the first one is that the solution doesn't affect the system stack layer. So this means that current BLE devices that work on single app devices don't need to be changed. Applications on multi-app platforms also don't need to be changed. The only thing that they need to do is they need to be able to receive a connection rejection or a connection failure from the operating system. And we believe that this should already be the case because applications should be ready for issues when the application is not able to connect to the device. Peripheral devices can remain unchanged and as long as the multi-application platforms are modified. And in this case, the data on the peripherals will be protected. A BLE device can have data as defined by the Bluetooth Special Interest Group, or it can have custom services and characteristics. This is important because in reality, standard defined attributes and characteristics don't have protection. So our solution would offer protection to those standard characteristics that today don't have any kind of protection against unauthorized access. In fact, as shown in the example, we show that we provide protection at the app layer even without pairing. And of course, our solution also has potential for fine-grained access control because we could even expand it to allow read or writes depending on the user requests and specify to the user that the device that is trying to connect is trying only to read or is trying only to write. So we could have also those permissions embedded into our system. Thank you very much for your time. We hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. And if you have any questions, please feel free to drop us an email or contact us now on the chat. We hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. And thanks again for listening to our talk.